Leansmith. This is a trend that we see more and more as a lot of the building blocks are starting to get figured out. I'm really excited for this next section. So we'll be doing a fireside chat with Andrew Ng. Andrew probably doesn't need any introduction to most folks here. I'm guessing a lot of people have taken some of his classes on Coursera or deep learning. But Andrew's been a big part of the LangChain story. So I met Andrew a little over 2 years ago at a conference when we started talking about LangChain, and he graciously invited us to do a course on LangChain with deep learning. I think it must have been the second or third one that they ever did, and I know a lot of people here probably watched that course or have started on LangChain because of that course. So Andrew has been a huge part of the LangChain journey, and I'm super excited to welcome him on stage for a fireside chat. So let's welcome Andrew Ng. They've definitely helped make our courses and explanations better, so thank you guys for that as well. You've obviously touched and thought about so many things in this industry, but one of your takes that I cite a lot, and probably people have heard you talk about, is your take on kind of like talking about the agenticness of an application as opposed to whether something's an agent. And so, as we're here now at an agent conference, maybe we should rename it to an agentic conference, but would you mind kind of like clarifying that? And I think it was like almost a year and a half, 2 years ago that you said that, and so I'm curious if things have changed in your mind since then.
So I remember actually Harrison and I both spoke at a conference over a year ago, and at that time I think both of us were trying to convince other people that agents are a thing that we should pay attention to. And that was before, maybe I think it was midsummer last year. There were a bunch of marketers got over the agentic term and started seeing that sticker everywhere. But to Harris's question, I think about a year and a half ago I saw that a lot of people are arguing this is an agent, this is not a different arguments, this is truly autonomous not to an agent. And I felt that it was fun to have the argument, but that we would succeed better as a community. We just say that the decrease to something is agentic. So and then we just say if you want to build an agentic system, a little bit of autonomy or a lot of autonomy is all fine. No need to spend time arguing is this truly an agent. Let's just call all these things agentic systems with different degrees of autonomy. And I think that actually, hopefully, reduce the amount of time people wasted spend arguing something's an agent. And let's just call it all agentic and then go on. So I think that actually works out.
Where on that spectrum of kind of like a little autonomy to a lot of autonomy do you see people building for these days?
Yeah, so my team routinely uses LangChain for our hardest problems, right? Complex flows and so on. I'm also seeing tons of business opportunities that, frankly, are fairly linear workflows or linear with just occasional side branches. So a lot of businesses, there are opportunities where you're right now with people looking at a form on the website, doing web search, checking some of the database to see if it's a compliance issue or if there are someone we should sell certain stuff to. And it's kind of take something, copy paste it into a web search, paste it in a different form. So in business processes, there are actually a lot of fairly linear workflows or linear with very small loops and occasional branches, usually equivalent to failures and reject this workflow. So I see a lot of opportunity, but one challenge I see businesses have is it's still pretty difficult to look at some stuff that's being done in your business and figure out how to turn it into an agentic workflow. So what is the granularity which you should bring down the state into micro tasks? And then, after you build your initial prototype, if it doesn't work well enough, which of these steps do you work on to improve performance? I think that whole bag of skills on how to look at a bunch of stuff that people are doing, break it into sequential steps, where are the small number of branches, how do you put in place evals, all that skill set is still far too new. And then of course, the much more complex agentic workflows, I think you heard a bunch about, with very complex groups, that's very valuable as well. But I see much more in terms of number of opportunities, still not value. There's a lot of simpler workflows that I think are still being used on.
Let's talk about some of those skills. Like, so you've been doing deep learning. I think a lot of courses are in pursuit of helping people kind of like build agents. And so what are some of the skills that you think agent builders all across the spectrum should kind of like master and get started with?
Boy, it's a good question. I wish I knew a good answer to that. I've been thinking a lot about this actually. I think a lot of the challenges, if you have a business process workflow, you often have people in compliance, people in HR, whatever, these steps. How do you put in place the either through the background type integration, or we'll see FCP also some of that too, to ingest the data, and then how do you prompt or process or multiple steps in order to build this end-to-end system? And one thing I see a lot is putting in place the right balance framework to not only understand the performance of the overall system, but to trace the individual steps. You can hone in on what's the one step that is broken, what's the one part that's broken to work on. I find that a lot of teams probably way longer than they should, just using human evals. Every time you change something, you then sit there and look at a bunch of output scenes, right? I see most teams probably slower to put in place evals, systematic evals than is ideal. But I find that having the right instincts in order to do things in the project is still really difficult, right? The skilled teams, the teams that still learning these skills will often, go down blind alleys, right? When you spend like a few months trying to improve one component, the more experienced team will say, you know what, I don't think this can ever be made to work. So just find a different way around this problem. I wish I knew, I wish I knew more efficient ways to get this kind of almost tactile knowledge. Often you're there, you look at the output, look at the trace, look at the LangChain output, and just got to make a decision, right? In minutes or hours on what to do next, and that's still very difficult.
And is this kind of like tactile knowledge mostly around LLMs and their limitations, or more around like just the product framing of things and that skill of taking a job and breaking it down? That's something that we're still getting accustomed to.
I think it's all of the above, actually. So I feel like over the last couple of years, AI tool companies have created an amazing set of AI tools. And this includes tools like LangGraph, also ideas like how do you think about RAG, how do you think about the chatbots, many different ways of approaching memory. What else? How do you do evals, how do you do guardrails? But I feel like there's this, mind-sprawling array of really exciting tools. But one picture I often have in my head is if all you have are, purple Lego bricks, right? You can't build that much interesting stuff. And think of these tools as being akin to Lego bricks, right? And the more tools you have, it's as if you don't just have purple Lego bricks, but the red one, the black one, and the yellow one, and the green one. And as you get more different color and shape Lego bricks, you can very quickly assemble them into really cool things. And so I think a lot of these tools are the ones that's ratting off as different types of Lego bricks. And when you're trying to build something, sometimes you need that very squiggly, weird-shaped Lego brick, and some people can go and they can plug it in and just get the job done. But if you never build evals of a certain type, then you can actually end up spending a few extra months doing something that someone else has done that before. Can say, oh well, we should just build evals this way, use the Mr. Judge, and just go through that process and get it done much faster. So one of the unfortunate things about AI is not just one tool. When I'm coding, I just use a whole bunch of different stuff, right? I'm not a master enough stuff myself. I've learned enough tools to separate quickly. So, and I think having that practice with different tools also helps with much faster decision making. And one of the things, it also changes. So, for example, because LLMs have been having a longer and longer context memory, a lot of best practices from RAG from a year and a half ago or whatever are much less relevant today. I remember Harrison was really early to a lot of these things. I played with the early LangChain, RAG frameworks, recursive summarization and all that. As our context memories got longer, now we just dump a lot more stuff into our context. It's not that RAG has gone away, but the hyperparameter tuning has gotten way easier. There's a huge range of hyperparameters that work just fine. So as LLMs keep harnessing the instincts we hold, to 2 years ago may or may not be relevant anymore today.
You mentioned a lot of things that I want to talk about. So, okay, what are some of the Lego bricks that are maybe underrated right now that you would recommend that people aren't talking about? Like evals, like, we had 3 people talking about evals, and I think that's top of people's mind. But what are some things that most people maybe haven't thought of or haven't heard of yet that you would recommend them looking into?
Good question. I don't know. I'm sure. So even though people talk about evals, for some reason people don't do it.
Why don't you think they do it?
I think it's because people often have. I saw a post of this on evals writers blog. People think of writing evals as this huge thing you have to do, right? I think of evals as something I'm going to throw together really quickly, in 20 minutes, and it's not that good, but it starts to complement my human eyeball evals. And so what often happens, I'll build a system and there's one problem, but I keep on getting regression. I thought I made it work, and it breaks, 5 year work, and it breaks, down it just getting annoying. Then I'll code a very simple eval, maybe with 5 input examples and some very simple elements judge to just check for this one regression, right? This one thing break. And then I'm not swapping out human evals for automated evals. I'm still looking at the output myself, but when I change something, I want this evals to just take this word and something so I don't have to think about it. And then what happens is, just like the way we write English maybe, once you have some slightly helpful but clearly very broken, imperfect eval, then you start going, you know what, I can improve my eval to make it better, I can improve to make it better. So just as when we build a lot of applications, we build some very quick and dirty thing that doesn't work, and we could make it better. For a lot of the way I build evals, I build really awful evals that barely helps. And then when you look at what it does, you go, you know what, this eval's broken, I can fix it. And you improve it and make it better. So that's one thing. Actually, one thing that people have talked about, but I think is so underrated, is the voice stack. It's one of the things that I'm actually very excited about voice applications. A lot of my friends are very excited about voice applications. I see a bunch of large enterprises really excited about voice applications, very large enterprises, very large use cases. For some reason, while there are some developers in this community doing voice, the amount of developer attention on voice stack applications, there is some, right? It's not people ignored it, but that's one thing that feels much smaller than the large enterprise importance I see, as well as applications coming down the line. And not all of this is the real-time voice that you have. It's not all speech-to-speech native audio models. I find those models are very hard to control, but when we use more of an agentic voice stack workflow, which I find much more controllable. I've worked with a ton of teams on voice stack stuff, that some of which hopefully will be announced in the near future. I've seen all the very exciting things. And then other things I think underrated, one of the ones that maybe is not underrated, but more person should do it. I think many of you have seen that developers that use AI systems in coding is so much faster than developers that don't. It's been interesting to see how many companies, CIOs and CTOs, still have policies that don't let engineers use AI assisted coding. I think maybe sometimes for good reasons, but I think we have to go past that because, frankly, I don't know, my teams and I just hate to ever have to code again about AI assistants. So I think some businesses need to get on that. I think underrated is the idea that I think everyone should learn to code. One fun fact about AI Fund, everyone in AI Fund, including the person that runs our front desk receptionist, and my CFO and my attorney and the general counsel, everyone in the AI Fund actually knows how to code. And it's not that I want them to be software engineers, they're not. But in their respective job functions, many of them are learning a little bit about how to code, are better able to tell a computer what they wanted to do. And so it's actually driving meaningful productivity improvements across all of these job functions that are not software engineering. So that's been exciting as well.
Talking about kind of like AI coding, what tools are you using for that personally?
So we're working on some things that we've not yet announced.
Exciting.
So maybe I do use Cursor, Windsurf, and some other things.
All right. Talking about voice, if people here want to get into voice and they're familiar with building kind of like like agents with LLMs, how similar is it? Are there a lot of ideas that are transferable, or what's new? What will they have to learn?
Yeah, so in terms of, there are a lot of applications where I think voice is important. They create certain interactions that are much more, it turns out that, it turns out from an application perspective, input text prompt is kind of intimidating, right? For a lot of applications, we'll use and say, tell me what you think, here's a block of text prompt, write a bunch of text for me. That's actually very intimidating for users. And one of the problems with that is people can use backspace, and so, people are just slower to respond via text. Whereas the voice, time goes forward, you just keep talking, you could change your mind, you like say, oh, I changed my mind, forget that earlier thing that my mom said she could do it. But I find that there are a lot of applications where the user friction to just getting them to use it is lower. You say, tell me what you think, and then they respond in voice. So in terms of voice, the one biggest difference is in terms of engineering language is latency, because if someone says something, you kind of really want to respond in sub 1 second, right? Less than 5 milliseconds is great, but really I'm using sub 1 second. And with a lot of agentic workloads that will run for many seconds. So when deep learning dynamic work with real avatar to build an avatar, this on like machine tells an avatar if you want. Our initial version had kind of 5 to 9 seconds of latency, and it's just a bad user experience. You say something, 9 seconds of silence, then my avatar responds. But so we wound up building things like we call it pre-response. So just as if you ask me a question, I might go, oh, that's interesting. So we prompted to basically do that to hide the latency, and it actually seems to work great. And there are all these other little tricks as well. Turns out we're building a voice customer service chatbot. It turns out that if you play background noise like customer contact center, it's a dead silence. People are much more accepting of that latency. So I find that there are all of these things that are different than a pure text-based LLM. But in applications where a voice-based modality lets them user be comfortable and just start talking, I think it sometimes really reduces user friction to getting some information out of them. I think when we talk, we don't feel like we need to deliver perfection as much as when we write. So it's somehow easier for people to just start blurting out their ideas and change their mind and go back and forth, and that lets us get the information from them that we need to help the user to move forward.
That's interesting. One of the new things that's out there, you mentioned briefly, is MCP. How are you seeing that transform how people are building apps, what types of apps they're building, or what's happening in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think it's really exciting. Just this morning, we released with Anthropic a short course on MCP. I actually saw a lot of stuff, on the interweb on MCP that I thought was quite confusing. So when we got to Anthropic, we said, let's create a really good short course on MCP that explains it clearly. I think MCP is fantastic. I think it was a very clear market gap, and that OpenAI adopted it. Also, I think speaks to the importance of this. I think the MCP standard will continue to evolve, right? So for example, I think many of you know what MCP is, right? It makes it much easier for agents primarily, but frankly, I think other types of software to plug into different types of data. When I'm using LLMs myself, or when I'm building applications, frankly, for a lot of us, we spend so much time on plumbing, right? So I think for those of you from large enterprises as well, the AI, especially reasoning models, are like pretty darn intelligent. They can do a lot of stuff when given the right context. But so I found that my team spend a lot of time working with plumbing on the data integrations to get the context of the LLM to make it to do something that offers pretty sensible when it's very in context. So MCP, I think, is a fantastic way to try to standardize the interface to a lot of tools or API calls as well as data sources. It feels a little bit like Wild West. A lot of MCP servers you find on the internet do not work, right? And then the authentication systems are kind of, even for the very large companies, with MCP service, the key is not clear, and the authentication token totally works, and there's bias and all of that going on. I think the MCP protocol itself is also early. Right now, MCP gives a long list of the resources available, just can't have like a long list of everything under the sun for an agent to sort out. So I think it's also a hierarchical discovery mechanism. So I think MCP is a really fantastic first step. Definitely encourage you to learn about it. It will make your life easier, probably, if you find a good MCP server implementation, some data integrations. And I think it will be important. It's this idea of when you have n models or n agents and n data sources, it should not be n times n effort to do all the integrations. It should be n plus n. And I think MCP is a fantastic first step. It will need to evolve like a fantastic first step to one data integration.
Another type of protocol that seemed less buzz than MCP is some of the agent-to-agent stuff. And I remember when we were at a conference a year or so ago, I think you were talking about multi-agent systems, which this would kind of enable. So how do you see some of the multi-agent or agent-to-agent stuff evolving?
So I think, agentic AI is still so early. Most of us, right, including me, we struggle with even making our code work. And so making my code, my agent work with someone else's agent, it feels like a too miracle. So I see that when one team is building a multi-agent system, that often works because we build a bunch of agents, they can read themselves, understand protocols, blah, blah, that works. But right now, at least at this moment in time, and maybe I'm off, the number of examples I'm seeing of when one team's agent and collection of agents successfully engages a totally different team's agent and collection of agents, I think we're a little bit early to that. I'm sure we'll get there, but I'm not personally seeing real huge success stories of that yet. I'm not sure that's true.
No, I agree. I think it's super early. I think if MCP is early, I think agent stuff is even earlier. Another thing that's kind of like top of mind right now is it's kind of vibe coding and all that. And you touched on it a little bit earlier with how people are using these AI coding assistants. But how do you think about vibe coding? Is that a different skill than before? What kind of purpose does that serve in the world?
Yeah, so I think many of us code barely looking at the code, right? I think it's a fantastic thing to be doing. I think it's unfortunate that called vibe coding because it's misleading a lot of people. And I think, okay, just go with the vibes, And frankly, when I'm coding for a day, with vibe coding or whatever, with air code assistance, I'm frankly exhausted by the end of the day. It's a deeply intellectual exercise. And so I think the name is unfortunate, but the phenomenon is real and it's been taking off and it's great. So I over the last year, I think people have been advising others to not learn to code on the basis that AI will automate coding. I think we'll look back at some of the worst career advice ever given. Because over the last many decades, as coding became easier, more people started to code. So it turns out, when we went from punch cards to keyboards and terminals, right? Or when it turns out I actually found some very old articles. When programming went from assembly language to literally COBOL, there were people arguing back then, COBOL is so easy, we don't need programmers anymore. And honestly, with making it easier, more people learn to code. And so with AI coding assistance, a lot more people should code. But I think, and it turns out one of the most important skills of the future for developers and non-developers is the ability to tell the computer exactly what you want, so they will do it for you. And I think understanding at some level, which all we can do, understanding at some level how a computer works lets you prompt or instruct the computer much more precisely, which is why I still try to advise everyone to learn one programming language, learn Python or something. And then I think maybe some of you know this, I personally am a much stronger Python developer than, say, JavaScript, right? But with AI assisted coding, I now write a lot more JavaScript and TypeScript code than I ever used to. But even with debugging, JavaScript code, that's something else wrote that's regular configures. Really understanding, what are the error cases, what does this mean? That's been really important for me to write on JavaScript.
If you don't like the name vibe coding, do you have a better name in mind?
Oh, that's a good question. I should think about that.
We'll get back to you on that.
Good question.
One of the things that you announced recently is a new fund for AI fund, so congrats on that. For people in the audience who are maybe thinking of starting a startup or looking into that, what advice do you have for them?
So, AI fund's a build companies and we exclusively invest in companies that we co-founded. So I think in terms of looking back on AI funds, lessons learned, the number one, I would say the number one predictor of a startup success is speed. I know we're in Silicon Valley, but I see a lot of people that have never seen yet the speed with which a skilled team can execute. And if you've never seen it before, I know maybe you have seen it, it's just so much faster than anything that slow businesses know how to do. And I think the number two predictor, also very important, is technical knowledge. It turns out if we look at the skills needed to build a startup, there's some things like how you market, how you sell, how you price, all that is important. But that knowledge has been around. It's a little bit more widespread. But the knowledge that's really rare is how does technology actually work? Because technology evolving so quickly. So I have deep respect for the go-to-market people. Pricing is hard, marketing is hard, positioning is hard, but that knowledge is more diffuse, and the most rare resource is someone that really understands how the technology works. So in our firm, we really like working with technical people that have good instincts or understands, do this, don't do that, this let's go twice as fast. And then I think along with the business stuff, that knowledge is very important and it's usually easier to figure out.
All right, that's great advice for starting something. We are going to wrap this up. We're going to go to a break now, but before we do, please join me in giving Andrew a big hand.
Our next session will begin in 15 minutes. This is a wonderful opportunity to get your fellow attendees and hear about new technologies for building agents in Nova. If you'd like to meet the LangChain team, or our last meeting founder who's also in Nova, come say hello. We'll be passing out some special swag. Please return to the main stage in 15 minutes for our next session featuring